Sometimes the people who love us most aren't the ones who brought us into this world. They're the ones who show up quietly, day after day, without ever needing a thank you. In today's story, a man preparing for his wedding uncovers a truth that shakes the foundation of who he thought he was. But in the ruins of that truth, he discovers something even deeper, a kind of love that doesn't need biology to be real. This is the story of the father who wasn't supposed to be his dad, but became the only one who ever truly was. I was 28, standing in the tuxedo my mother helped pick out, rehearsing the same vows I had written weeks ago. The ceremony was just around the corner. The florists were setting up outside. My bride's dress was hanging 2 rooms away, and I was spiraling, not because I was nervous to marry the woman I loved, but because 6 days earlier I had received a phone call that cracked open my world. My fiancé and I had done a premarital genetic screening. It was nothing unusual, just a precaution because a rare disorder ran in her family. I didn't expect anything from it. I even joked that the most exciting result would be finding out whether our kids might have green or brown eyes. But the doctor didn't sound like he was calling with a joke. He asked to meet with me privately. I showed up, thinking it might be some anomaly with the tests. What he said hit me like a truck. He looked at me with that careful, calm doctors use when they're about to say something irreversible. Are you absolutely certain that both of your parents are your biological parents? He asked. I laughed. Pretty sure my mom would have mentioned that at some point. He didn't laugh. He pulled up the lab results. Your blood type is AB. Your mother and listed father both have type O. Genetically speaking, that's nearly impossible. Your DNA doesn't line up with theirs. I just sat there. I wasn't angry. Not yet. Not even sad. Just numb, disoriented. Like someone had replaced the floor beneath me with an open sky. I walked out of that clinic and got into my car, gripping the steering wheel like it might anchor me to reality. But all I could think about was my dad, the man who taught me how to ride a bike in our frozen driveway, the man who fixed up my first car from scraps in the garage, the man who was supposed to walk me down the aisle with a proud smile on his face. And now, this, I replayed every moment in my head, scanning for clues I'd missed. Did he ever look at me differently? Was there ever a moment of hesitation in his love? But no, there wasn't. Still, I couldn't unhear what the doctor had said. The numbers don't lie. The biology doesn't lie. So if he wasn't my biological father, who was? And more importantly, did he know? I didn't go home that night. I checked into a motel 2 towns over. I stared at the ceiling until 3 a.m., trying to decide if I should confront my parents or pretend I never found out. But the more I tried to ignore it, the louder the truth got in my head. By morning, I had made a decision. If my life was going to unravel, it would unravel honestly. And the first person I needed answers from was my mother. I didn't go straight to my mom. Not yet. I needed time to process what this all meant, not just logically, but emotionally. So I drove, nowhere in particular, just miles of empty roads and snow-lined fields on the edge of town. Eventually, I parked at the overlook just off Highway 5, the one Dad used to take me to when I was a kid, We'd eat burgers in the car and watch the sun go down over the lake. I hadn't been there in years, and that's when the memories started flooding in. My dad, the man I always called Dad, quiet, reserved, not the type to say, I love you out loud, but he didn't need to. His actions did the talking. He worked long shifts in construction, then extra hours during the winter, plowing driveways just to make ends meet. I remember one January, when I was 9, he took on overnight shifts at Tim Hortons just so we could pay the hydro bill and still afford hockey skates for me. He used to shovel the snow off the front steps before I even woke up. He'd pack my lunch every morning while pretending he didn't know I hated mustard. When I was sick, he'd sit beside my bed with a crossword book in his lap just to make sure I wasn't alone. He was always there, and yet he wasn't my biological father. It didn't make sense, but at the same time, it made perfect sense because none of what he gave me came from biology. It came from choice, from presence, from consistency. I remember this one day. I must have been 12 when I got into a fight at school. A kid had said something cruel about my mom, and I snapped, got suspended for a day. I thought he was going to be furious, but instead, he drove me home in silence. Then, before I went to my room, he put a hand on my shoulder and said, "You're better than what people say about you. Don't ever let their words define who you become." That was it. No yelling, no grounding, just belief in me, even when I didn't believe in myself. He wasn't affectionate. He never talked about feelings, but I felt safe around him. I felt seen. And in that moment, sitting in my car, I realized something no DNA test could ever undo. I knew who my dad was. I had always known. Even if science wanted to question it, my heart didn't. But still, I needed to know the truth. Not because I doubted his love, but because I wanted to understand the silence, the secret, the story behind the man who chose to stay, even when he didn't have to. That night, I drove back to my childhood home. My mom was watching the news when I came in. She smiled, surprised to see me, and asked if everything was okay. I looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time, I saw the weight she'd been carrying for years, right there in her eyes. I sat down across from her, hands clenched. "Mom," I said quietly, "is Dad really my father?" She didn't answer at first, but she didn't deny it either. She didn't answer me right away. My question just hung there, floating between us like smoke from a candle just blown out. My mom turned the TV off and stared down at her hands, fingers trembling slightly. She folded them in her lap like she was trying to keep herself from falling apart. "Why are you asking me that?" she finally whispered. I leaned forward. "Because I had a medical screening and the results don't add up. Blood types, DNA. The doctor said it's nearly impossible that Dad is my biological father." She let out a shaky breath, and I saw the truth, breaking through the thin surface of her silence. Her mouth opened, then closed again, and when she finally spoke, her voice didn't sound like hers anymore. It sounded like someone much older, someone tired. "It was only once," she said. The room went completely still. "He was a coworker. Your father was away at the time, working up north on the pipeline. I was lonely, I was stupid, and it happened. Once." My hands were clenched so tightly I could feel my nails digging into my palms. I wanted to scream, to cry, to leave, but I just sat there, frozen in disbelief. Who was he? I asked. She shook her head. Doesn't matter. He left before. I even told him I was pregnant. I haven't seen or heard from him since. I tried to wrap my head around it. My entire identity, who I was, where I came from, suddenly had a blank spot in the middle, a missing puzzle piece I never even knew was gone. But Dad knew, I asked. She nodded slowly, eyes glistening. I told him, right after I found out I was pregnant. I was ready to leave, to let him go, but he didn't even hesitate. She swallowed hard. He just looked at me and said, "We'll raise him. He's our son now." And then he hugged me, and we never talked about it again. My throat tightened. I could barely breathe. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked. Her eyes brimmed with tears. "Because he asked me not to. He said it would only confuse you, that it wouldn't help anything, that it didn't change how he felt." I looked at her, this woman who had raised me, comforted me, packed my lunches, and kissed my scraped knees, and yet had kept this secret for nearly 3 decades. "I don't blame you for the mistake," I said quietly, "but I wish you'd trusted me enough to know the truth." She nodded. "I was scared that if you knew, you'd stop loving him, or worse, that you'd start searching for someone who never wanted to be found." Silence fell again, but it wasn't heavy this time. It was sad, human. I stood up and walked to the hallway. My hand hesitated on the doorknob. One more question. "Does he know that I know?" She shook her head. "Not unless you told him." I didn't answer. I just stepped outside and stood on the porch, staring out at the street where I learned to ride my first bike. The man who taught me that wasn't my father by blood, but he was still my dad, and somehow that made him even more. I didn't sleep. That night, I lay awake in the dark, my mind looping through everything I had just learned. The silence of my apartment felt heavier than usual, not oppressive, but expectant, like the truth had more to say. By 6 a.m., I was already in my car, driving to my parents' place. I didn't really know what I was going to say to him. I just knew I needed to see him, to look him in the eye, and understand how he'd lived with that truth all these years. When I arrived, the house was quiet. Morning light filtered through the curtains in the kitchen. My dad was already up, sitting at the table with a cup of coffee and a crossword book, his Saturday ritual for as long as I could remember. He looked up and smiled. "Morning, kid. You're early." "Yeah," I replied, trying to sound casual. "Couldn't sleep. Coffee's fresh." He poured me a cup, handed it over, then returned to his crossword. He didn't ask why I was there. He didn't pry, and I didn't bring it up. I sat there, sipping my coffee, silently studying the man who had raised me like his own. Part of me wanted to ask, to just blurt it out. "Did you know? Why didn't you tell me? Why did you stay?" But I couldn't. I looked at his hands, calloused, sturdy, the kind that had fixed my broken skates, patched up old drywall, carried me when I twisted my ankle during a hiking trip. Those hands weren't made for deception. They were made for showing up. We talked about the wedding. He asked if I'd decided on the seating chart. I laughed and told him it was a lost cause. An hour passed. Then I stood up, thanked him for the coffee, and told him I'd see him tomorrow. He just nodded. Drive safe. As I walked out to my car, the crisp morning air hit me like a second cup of coffee. But what really woke me up was what I found on my windshield, an envelope, my name written on it in his handwriting, neat, steady, unmistakable. I opened it right there in the driveway, hands trembling slightly. Inside was a letter, just one page. No fanfare, no drama, just a quiet voice on paper. Son, I figured one day you might find out, and I want you to know I've never been ashamed of it, not for a second. From the first moment I held you in my arms, you were mine, not by blood, but by choice, by love. And that kind of bond doesn't break just because of biology. You don't owe me anything. I never stayed to be owed. I stayed because I wanted to, because raising you has been the best thing I've ever done. If you're hurting right now, I'm sorry. I wish I could take that pain away. But please remember this. I may not have given you life, but you gave me a life worth living. Always, Dad. I didn't cry at first. I just stood there, the letter fluttering slightly in the wind, my breath catching in my throat. But when I got into my car, I broke. The kind of cry you don't control, the kind that empties you out. He knew. All along, he knew. And still, he chose me. For the next 3 days, I disappeared. I turned off my phone, ignored texts from my fiancé, skipped work. I stayed in a small cabin up near Georgian Bay. No cell service, no noise, just trees, wind, and my thoughts. It wasn't that I was running away. I just didn't know how to move forward without first figuring out where I stood. I reread my dad's letter at least a dozen times. Every word etched itself into my brain. The simplicity of it, the calm conviction, no guilt, no regret, just love. Quiet, patient, and unconditional. But I wasn't calm. I was angry, confused, betrayed, and somehow grateful all at once. I didn't even know emotions could coexist like that. I found myself staring out at the frozen lake one morning, bundled in a thick parka, thermos in hand. I was trying to feel something other than lost. And that's when a memory floated in, so ordinary, yet so vivid, it stopped me cold. I was maybe 11. It was spring, the gutters overflowing after a storm. I had built a paper boat and was floating it down the street like some great explorer. At some point, I tripped and split my chin on the curb, blood everywhere. I remember my dad scooping me up, holding a rag against the wound with one hand and the back of my head with the other. He didn't panic. He didn't yell. He just said, I've got you, buddy, over and over, like a heartbeat. And he did. He had me then. He had me every day after. How many people are chosen like that? How many are loved? Not because someone has to, but because someone wants to. I realized then that my pain wasn't from learning the truth. It was from realizing I had never truly thanked him for all the times he chose me. That hurt more than anything. I thought about canceling the wedding, not out of doubt, but because I felt like I couldn't walk into a new chapter of my life while carrying this confusion in my chest. But then I remembered something he said years ago when I was struggling to pick a university. You'll never have all the answers before you begin, but you begin anyway. That's how answers find you. Maybe I didn't need to solve everything right now. Maybe I just needed to take the next step. So I packed up, drove back home, and showed up at his house that Sunday morning, just like I used to do when I was a teenager, needing car advice or an excuse to eat too many pancakes. We didn't talk about the letter, not directly. He handed me a mug of coffee, nodded toward the backyard, and said, "Shed door's sticking again. Think you can help me fix it?" And just like that, we got to work. Side by side, no questions, no awkwardness, just presence. And, for the first time in days, I felt grounded. No matter how I came into this world, this man had built mine, one act of love at a time, and that was something no DNA could ever replace. I never told him I knew, not because I was afraid, but because I realized it didn't need to be said. We were both men who didn't always speak the deepest truths out loud. We lived them through action, through presence. But something had shifted. I started showing up more. Sunday mornings became sacred again, just like when I was a kid. We'd drink coffee in the garage, fix whatever needed fixing, or sometimes just sit in a comfortable silence, watching the squirrels tear up Mom's flower beds. It felt simple. It felt right. But under it all was this growing need in me, not for answers, but for honor. He had spent his whole life loving me in the shadows of a truth I never knew. And now that I did, I couldn't let him stay in that shadow forever. One afternoon, I overheard my parents talking in the kitchen. "He's been different lately," Mom said. "He knows," Dad replied. "Are you sure?" He sighed. "I can tell, but he's not angry. That's enough." A pause. "You still think we did the right thing, keeping it from him?" He didn't answer immediately. Then I heard the sound of his chair creak as he stood up. "I didn't stay for me," he said softly. "I stayed for him, and I'd do it again." I swallowed hard, quietly backing away before they noticed me. That night, I sat in bed with a notepad, sketching out the wedding details again. There was one thing I still hadn't finalized: my speech. And suddenly, I knew exactly what I needed to say. But more than that, I knew what I needed to do. This man, my dad, had spent his life choosing me without fanfare, without recognition. I wanted to give him something he never asked for, but deeply deserved: to be seen, not just as the man who raised me, but as my father, in front of everyone. In the weeks leading up to the wedding, I made a few quiet changes. I moved his seat to the front row. I had his name added beside Mom's on the ceremony program, under the words, "With deepest gratitude to the parents who shaped who we are." And then I had something special made: a white rose, boutonniere, hand pinned by me, traditionally worn by the father of the bride. But this time, it would be worn by the father of the groom, because whether the world saw it or not, he was my father. He always had been, and it was finally time to say it out loud. The ceremony was beautiful, the kind of crisp September afternoon you can only get in southern Ontario. Sunlight warm but mellow, maple leaves just starting to hint at gold. My bride looked radiant. The guests, the music, the setting. It was everything we dreamed it would be. But I wasn't thinking about any of that when I stood at the microphone at the reception. I was thinking about him. He was seated at the front, wearing the navy blue suit he always saved for special occasions. His boutonniere, a simple white rose, stood out against the dark fabric. I had pinned it there myself, moments before the ceremony, watching his hands tremble just slightly as I did. Didn't think I'd be wearing one of these, he said, with a small smile. You deserve it, I replied. Now, it was time to say the rest. I looked out over the room, cleared my throat. Most people expect the groom to toast his bride first, I began, voice steady, despite the lump forming in my throat. And I will. But before I do, I want to speak about someone else. Someone who's sitting in this room, trying not to make eye contact with me right now. Laughter rippled gently through the crowd. I glanced at him. He chuckled, but kept his eyes fixed on the table. I grew up believing my dad was quiet, stern, not much of a talker. But what I've learned, especially in the last few months, is that love doesn't always speak loudly. Sometimes it fixes your bike at 6 a.m. before school. Sometimes it stands in the rain at your soccer game, even after a double shift. Sometimes it lets you believe a version of the world that feels safe, because that's what love does. The room went still. I took a breath. I found out recently that the man who raised me isn't my biological father. A wave of silence swept through the guests. But here's the thing. He is my father. He's the man who showed up, who chose me, who carried the weight of truth, not to protect himself, but to protect me. I turned to him now. You gave me your name, your time, your patience, your back when I needed to be carried. You gave me everything a father could give, without ever needing a thank you. He finally looked up, and for the first time in my life, I saw him cry. I can't repay what you gave me, but I can honor it. So today, in front of everyone I love, I want to say it out loud. You are my father, not by blood, but by every act that ever mattered. I stepped off the stage and walked toward him. He stood up. I wrapped my arms around him. A full, shaking, unguarded hug. He held on tight. Thank you, I whispered. He leaned in close. Always. We stood like that for a moment, longer than needed. But it felt right. Later that evening, we shared a slow dance. Not traditional, not planned. Just the two of us on the dance floor, as You'll Be in My Heart played softly in the background. People clapped, some wiped away tears, but we didn't notice.